So thank you everybody for joining us. We're so happy to have everybody here. This is a topic that is very close to my heart as an educator myself who's recently come out of the classroom. I really wanted to create a webinar this month just to share how the observations that we make about the children who we either work with or we live with and we have in our families, these observations are across the board. This isn't something that is only isolated at home or this is only isolated at school. These are things that anybody who comes into connection or into the kind of has the interaction with students will see the same things. And so I wanted to have this platform to share with you all that the power of Smart Families in our program is to unify us all together so that we can all be working towards the same goal. And here at Smart Families, that is that we are looking and honouring the reasons to delay smartphones until after 8th grade. And then as a byproduct of that, what we do is we have much more connected and much more integrated families and schools. So welcome everybody. For those joining us, we have our guest Sheila, who is joining us from her school today. I am going to just run through a few presentation slides, just really to frame a lot of what the content is that Sheila's going to share with us. And then following the presentation slides, Sheila and I have had some really great conversations over the past month or so, just about shared observations of things that we've identified in students in the past. And Sheila has a really great story and kind of testimony to share about something that she experiences with her students through a field trip that leaves Houston and they travel on an aeroplane, and they are a smartphone free field trip. And so she's going to share some really great kind of updates on what that looks like and how that's looked over the years. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. And I'm going to start from the beginning. Awesome. Okay, so just a couple of the slides I'm going to touch upon. If you have seen our newsletter this month, you will see, or last month, it is Connected or Distracted. And it's really looking at the things that we notice in schools that are particularly prominent when it comes to smartphones and how students are interacting with smartphones. And is it that they are more connected or is it that they're more distracted? So I'm just going to very quickly touch on academic performance, a little bit on focus and attention, a little bit on school loneliness, and then introduce Sheila. So in terms of academic performance, this is something that educators have been aware of for many, many years, and especially kind of post-COVID when everything went online and we noticed a huge change in students' behaviours and maybe interactions with peers. But then we also started to notice, and the world started to talk about what had happened with regards to academics. And so in the newsletter this month, I posted a really interesting study that is conducted every 3 years by the Programme for International Student Assessment. And what they do is they actually go around the world globally and they interview and collect data from so many students from all different backgrounds, from all different countries. And the students in particular for this study are aged 15. And they continue to track these students every 3 years by collecting the data. And so you can see here that this is just some plotting that they've been looking at specifically around math, reading and science from 2003, and then the current one came out in 2022. And the data really is a strong representation of what educators have maybe been noticing themselves at school. For example, you can notice there's been a kind of steady trajectory downwards for achievement in there. So the left-hand side, you'll see the points that there are scored. Interestingly, in the US, math, they scored lower than they'd ever scored before. And they actually put the US math achievement in the bottom half of the all of the countries who were examined. And interestingly, it became a bit of an anomaly area for them to really analyze the data because they couldn't compare the US to some of the other countries in the world who maybe don't have the same economic status. And so a lot of really interesting discussion has been talking or focusing around why is this, like what is happening with students. And one of the things that this study specifically looked at was smartphones and the prevalence of smartphones in schools, the ways that students use their smartphones, and specifically they looked at distractions. What are the ways children are being distracted? So here, there's just a little did you know at the side. So they found that students who spent 5 to 7 hours daily on their phones scored an average of 49 points lower in math compared to those who limited their phone usage to an hour or less. And what they looked at all the study and all the data, and they found that that was equivalent to about 3/4 of a year of progress that children were losing. And so when they looked at smartphones, now I will say, and if you watch the media and kind of, you know, we're always looking at research on this, it's very interesting because schools are actively pursuing getting smartphones either totally out of campus. Some schools are looking at specific ways, things called Yonder bags, which are bags that students place their phones into. They're sealed for that entire day, and the children are only able to open these Yonder bags, which is like a magnetic, a bit like if you go to the store and if a clothing item has got a tag on that they have to use the machine to get the tag off. That's the same concept. So children are not able to use their smartphones on campus and take them out of the bag until the very end of the day. And then some students are also asked to just either put them away, maybe in a locker, maybe within their school bags. However, and Sheila and I spoke a little bit about this on a previous conversation, if you look bottom left of your screen, you'll see that 273 is the average number of notifications a teenager receives each day. And around 25% of these come during school hours. And research has shown that just the mere presence of a smartphone somewhere near a child, whether it is in their locker, is enough of a distraction to be problematic for them to be able to stay engaged and focused on what it is that they're supposed to be doing. And so rather than being in a classroom and engaging with their peers or maybe engaging, they in their heads are thinking, you know, I wonder if I'm going to come back and find anybody's liked my post, or maybe is there somebody's included me in something on a group message. And so very interesting, and definitely gives some value to schools who are saying that smartphones are not welcome on campus. Some news from the UK recently, which is obviously where I'm from. The UK about a week ago recently announced that they were going to become much firmer on removing smartphones from campuses, like period. And so the UK government have recently come out with a lot of information and help to give to schools to help really push this movement of removing smartphones from schools. So we're definitely seeing a change, and especially when we get data like this, which is showing these trends, these downward plotting trends, and that we are noticing that there is some interaction between this and smartphones on campuses, that hopefully in the next maybe 3 to 5 years, we'll see some real big shifts. So a little bit about academics and smartphones. Moving on. Oops. Oh, sorry, look at my, I'm going to go backwards. I've just noticed that, so I apologise, the teacher in me now is like, oh gosh, that's not where it's supposed to be on my slide. Okay, so a little bit about focus and attention. This is one of the things that I was most outspoken about within my school when I was sharing with, you know, administration, sharing with parents, even sharing with my students, that I noticed a huge shift in my students' ability to retain and maintain focus and their attention. Now, as a side note to this, I would also be hearing the conversations of my students, you know, during lunchtime and recess. And so I knew there was some engagement with things like YouTube Shorts. Some of them were watching other kind of short videos. And I started to really wonder whether there was any interaction between these very short snippets like of information, you know, dumps that they were getting through these short videos, and their seemingly inability to stay with me through a more maybe comprehensive math lesson. So if there was something that was more complex, a math strategy that we really needed to invest time in, I would notice that my students' attention and focus would waver. And it was very interesting to me. Definitely post-COVID again, and there hasn't been a huge lot of research that has come out yet, official research, definitely noticing things like trends and observations, but not any formal research about what happened kind of post-COVID with our students who went digital, like heavily digital for a kind of an extended period of time. Dr. Larry Rosen is a researcher, psychologist. He lectures at the California State University. And one of the things he's particularly interested in is focus and attention. And he has been studying this for a long, long time. And he has released, he has numerous books. His first book came out, if you remember, MySpace, which was kind of in the infancy of social media. He was writing about this during the MySpace era. And he was really looking to see what was happening to our children through these interactions on these platforms. So he said that the average adolescent or young adult finds it difficult to study for 15 minutes at a time. When forced to do so, they will spend at least 5 of those minutes in a state of distraction. And so one of the things that is interesting when it comes to focus and attention is that children have to practice the skill of prolonged focus, or another word for that is directed attention. And so this is something that if a student is reading a book, maybe something that requires more thought, more like cognitive processes. Again, this is the part that this happens in the prefrontal cortex, which we talked about on our previous webinars. And so maintaining that prolonged focus really aids them and benefits them in their educational journey. And I think Sheila will touch on this a little bit. Sheila is an English teacher, so I mean, this is definitely in her wheelhouse about children and their ability to focus and have that sustained attention. And this is just an observation that's changing, and researchers are absolutely studying this and seeing what's happening. Now, when students are bombarded at home, if they're using these platforms, maybe they're using devices, older students, we know, if they're engaging with things like TikTok and Instagram and YouTube Shorts, this constant stream of information really inhibits them from going into really deep learning. When it comes to school, they have this kind of mismatch. But also the dopamine that is continually being fed through their brains through these interactions and these very short, it makes them chase the dopamine. And so they're constantly looking for novel things to keep their brain, kind of saturated with the dopamine level that makes them feel good. And so, again, it's just really difficult for these students to, who are kind of immersed in this world of short videos, to then come to a school setting and have to sit in a classroom and not only have to manage the distractions of maybe potentially knowing they have a smartphone at school or knowing they have a device that they want to check and see if anything's happened in their absence, but then also they're just not able to focus and have their attention in the same way. Something in the newsletter we touched on was something called TikTok brain. And so this has become an actual phrase that is being used by people studying focus and attention, specifically around TikTok. Now, some of these videos, they kind of started at 60 seconds, but some of these videos are now 15 seconds long. So they only has to have somebody and capture somebody's attention for 15 seconds, and then it's feeding them more. And especially with platforms like YouTube, who have this continual video cycle, so the child no longer even has to stop and search or scroll. They are locked into a screen that just auto plays next video after next video. And so you can see how their attention is being captured in this way. Somebody who we have been connected to here at Smart Families is this gentleman. His name is Dino Ambrosi. He is the founder of Project Reboot, and him and I have connected because he is actually a man who growing up became addicted to technology. And he has a very interesting perspective of what that looks like and why that happened. And he, in his kind of testimony, will share that when he was at high school, His day was so strictly managed. So he was doing his lessons. He would then maybe have sports after school. And so his day was very dictated. Like he had this at this time, this at this time. Now, where it became problematic, he already had a technology addiction during that time, but because he had like his mum taking him to places or he had to be at practice, his time was kind of structured. However, when he went to college, was this first experience of being independent and having all of this free time that he'd not experienced before. And he was already bringing with him an addiction to technology that he hadn't really quite acknowledged was an addiction. He just knew that he was very captivated and spent a lot of time wanting to be in these platforms. So when he got to college, he quickly discovered that he could not take himself away from things like social media. And he started failing his classes because rather than going to his classes, he would be engaging with technology and on these platforms. And he devised, and he actually has great self-awareness and decided, like, what is this? Why is this happening? What's happened to me? I've always had good grades. All of a sudden I'm failing. And he knew it's about technology. So he actually created a course, which is all about becoming tech intentional. And so he now has this course and he takes it around to students, and students can commit to to wanting to reduce their screen time down. And you can see here that people who've engaged with his course, this Project Reboot, say that on average, they have reduced it down by about 3 hours per day. And I'm going to just play you a very short video. It's just 3 minutes. This is his kind of field that he is in now. He studies a lot to do with what's going on with teenagers. And this is a TEDx talk that he did. And he actually did this for teenagers. Why this is interesting is this time now. So whether you're a parent of a young child, maybe an elementary age, maybe like myself, you're a parent of middle school children. And what we are doing now and what we are pouring into these children now is so vital to help set them up for success for when they do go off, maybe to college, or maybe if they want to go traveling, or maybe they work, whatever is in their journey. What we help put into place now is so important. And this is just a very short snippet of a longer TEDx talk. I can make this available and put it in the chat if you wanted to watch the whole thing, but very impactful. And he's speaking to 18-year-old students. Okay. And you have to excuse, I think maybe the pre-video will come up first, the little ad at first. So. Okay. Okay, apologies. Here we go.
Sally, we can't hear the video. Could you, yes, thank you.
Can you hear now?
No.
Okay, spare me 1 second. Okay,
yes.
Sorry, I appreciate, thank you. We did practice this, didn't we, Hillary, to make sure?
we did specifically practice this, so you'll get it.
So I've learned from other webinars that if I reshare, that it should, just spare me 1 second. Thank you for your patience, everybody. So I'm going to share audio. I'm going to try again. Let me know, Hillary.
Take a second to take that in.
We're good to go. Great.
Probably not as many as you would.
Okay, I'm just going to back it up a tiny little bit so you can.
The dots on this screen represent an adult life in months, assuming a life expectancy of 90. So if you're 18 years old right now, this is an optimistic estimate of the months that you have left. Take a second to take that in. Probably not as many as you would expect. And I'm sorry to say that it does get worse, because about a third of that time is going to be spent sleeping. On average, 126 of those months will go to school and your career. About 18 will be spent driving, 36 cooking and eating, 36 doing chores and errands, and about 27 in the bathroom and taking care of personal hygiene. So that leaves you with 334 months, optimistically, for everything else. So this is where you tick the boxes on your bucket list. This is where you pursue your passions and travel the world and leave your mark. How you spend this time is going to determine the quality of your life. But this time isn't just something that you spend, it's also something that you invest. Because what you do with it will quite literally determine the kind of person you become. The body, mind, and character that you will have in the future are being actively shaped by how you choose to use your time today. So take a second and ask yourself, what do you want to do with that free time? What things do you want to do that you haven't done? Who do you want to spend that time with? What is worth investing it in? Now, I would be willing to bet that scrolling through TikTok, binge watching Netflix, and playing video games probably did not come to mind. But today, the average 18-year-old in the United States is on pace to spend 93% of their remaining free time looking at a screen. That is not counting time for school. So wrap your head around how sad that is. Imagine getting to the age of 90, seeing this visualization of how you spent all your time after the age of 18, and thinking about all the things you could have done that you did not do because you got distracted.
Okay, I'm going to pause there. Isn't that very impactful? So I think as a visual, that's very, very impactful about how just very intentional a lot of these platforms are created to distract our teenagers into having a life that isn't fulfilled with the way they want it to be fulfilled. So he goes on to talk a little bit more in his TEDx talk. It's a really great talk. I can share that for you. But again, we are, really creating a foundation with our children now for how they're going to be and live successfully, after they've left school and after they have gone on into the world to, create an impact. So I just wanted to share that. And then the final thing I'm going to talk to you about quickly before I speak to Sheila is just about school loneliness. And we've had some really interesting conversations in our office about school loneliness. I know Hillary shared with me, she had spoken to somebody from within a school who was sharing with her that in the past, when there was a child who maybe was feeling isolated or more lonely, in the past in a school, they would have been easier to be able to spot. So a counselor maybe would have known that this child was feeling lonely or isolated because they would have been the ones sitting on their own, maybe in the cafeteria, kind of just head down, not interacting with anybody. But what has happened now is this precedent of, kids just on screens, kind of head down, so immersed in this digital world that being able to identify loneliness has become a lot more difficult. And there's a really lovely testimony I also had read from some teachers who had shared that they had removed smartphones from their school and very intentionally, especially around lunch times and free times. And they had reported actually hearing kids talk and interact and laugh, and they were like, oh gosh, this is how it used to be at school when we used to hear these students who were laughing and joking together. And so they were actually very welcoming of the noise and said that actually feels more like what kids are supposed to be doing, because at least they're interacting with each other and not just kind of sucked into a screen. This is also in the newsletter if you wanted to read a little bit more. This just reports that despite being hyper connected, and that's what we know our teenagers and our students are now, they are hyper connected, the loneliness that they're feeling at school has been increasing. Notably in 2012 was when most American children had a smartphone, and was also when platforms like Instagram and a lot of these platforms that people use to compare themselves to each other and to the world really became a stronghold. And so you'll see there's a huge trajectory jump there about children who feel lonely at school. And so, like I say, just to conclude, what I would really challenge you to do after this webinar is to really think about what is a friend, and is this a conversation that we have with our children? So social media has absolutely redefined what friendship means now. It sometimes is just that you press accept and that person, then we call them a friend. However, there are some virtues when it comes to friendship that I would love you to even have this conversation, what any age your child is, whether they're young or low elementary, but really to discuss what is a friend. Some of the virtues that are considered with friendship is reciprocal. I had to learn how to say this word because it's pronounced different in America. I'll say, is the friendship reciprocated? Dr. Collier shares this in some of her books about, if somebody does something for you, do you do something for them? Or is it all one-sided? Is it just something that is an online friend that you don't receive anything from? Also having empathy, being able to empathize with each other is something very important when it comes to friendship. Having a shared life, maybe having a shared vision, shared goals, and also self-knowledge, just knowing about who you are in the world and knowing who you are amongst all your friends. So I just wanted to share, this is just a little touch point that you can have with your friends. Now, I just want to side note and preface this with, there are some children who absolutely can find good friendships digitally. And I use my kind of digital platforms to connect with people who live far away, like family and friends who are away. And there is definitely a place for it. But when these children are reporting increased feelings of loneliness, but if you were to look at their social media kind of accounts and they have got these thousands of friends, you would really challenge them to say, who are the people who would come and help you out if you weren't feeling well or you needed a friend to come round, who would drop their everything and come and help you? And they're the friendships that we really need to nurture. And I just want to end with, this is a quote that we featured, a Bible scripture that we featured in the newsletter from John 15. And this really came to me a few years ago when I was thinking about the concept of pruning. And I was an adult before I learned what it would mean to prune away friendships that didn't serve me either anymore or didn't serve me in the same way as I was kind of growing and learning. And so this is another conversation that maybe parents don't have often. It is very natural to be able to prune away friendships if friendships are changing or if friendships aren't becoming any of these virtues. Again, you could challenge, if you have a student who is on a social media platform, encourage them. Are there any connections online that they can prune away that's actually going to make their life more fruitful? So pruning away is taking away the things that don't serve anymore so that you're able to grow fruit. So yes, that's one of our things I'd love you to challenge. And even if you're an educator, sharing that with students, like what are their connections? Are they friends? Are they real, deep, meaningful friends? Is it just a mere connection? Is there any way that they can prune away things that are kind of not serving them anymore so that they can grow this fruit and become more connected and feel less lonely? So they are my slides. I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, so Sheila and I have got some prepared questions, but one of my things I love about Sheila is that when we get into a conversation, we kind of have a lovely flow. So I have some questions to scaffold, but it's definitely just going to be a nice kind of relaxed conversation. So Sheila, would you maybe just start by sharing a little bit of an introduction about yourself, and and also how long you've been teaching, the subject that you teach. So feel free just to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you, Sally. Good morning. I am Sheila Drews. I have been a teacher for 41 years now, and it started when I was 3 or 4 years old. But 41 years, part of that time in public school, part of that time in private school. I've always taught middle school English, with the majority of my time being spent with 8th graders. So English, writing, and reading is what I spend my whole day doing.
Thank you. So originally Sheila and I were connected because I was having a conversation with a counsellor who said to me, there is a really interesting person you should speak to who takes the 8th grade students away on a trip away without the smartphones. And so could you provide us kind of some framework? I know over the phone you shared kind of a funny anecdotal story about something that happened 30 years ago. And just tell us a little bit about what is the trip and what do you do with the students?
So we take the standard 8th grade trip every year. We go to Washington, D.C. for an entire week. And typically I take about 75 kids with 5 other teachers. And those are the only people who go as chaperones. The thing that seems to cause the most consternation with parents is that we don't take cell phones with them. The students don't take cell phones with them. The chaperones all have cell phones, but the students don't have any at all. We decided to do this about 30 years ago when we happened to have a student on the trip who had a very early stage cell phone. And when something happened on the trip, he was on his phone so quickly talking to his mother about it that people here in our school community knew more about what was going on than was really fair. We were still figuring out what was happening in DC, and we were taking care of that situation. And as a teacher, a lot of things happen in my classroom that it takes a little time to work out all the details. I'm very open in terms of letting people know what's going on and contacting parents, but I need to be able to work through it myself. So the fact that this boy had called his mother first just raised all kinds of concerns with other parents. They felt that there were safety issues involved in all kinds of things. And then we started getting all kinds of calls through the school. Parents would call school and school would contact us. And of course, everybody's up in the air. What's going on? And the story, of course, escalates, right? Before you knew it, we'd been in a terrible car accident and people were hurt and they were taking us to hospitals. None of that, oh my gosh, none of that had happened. Everybody was perfectly safe. So once that happened, it sort of brought home to us the power that cell phones had, right? That instant communication. And sometimes instant communication is great. We need it when you're calling for emergencies, for instance. But in this situation, we very rarely had emergencies that needed instant communication with the parent. So after that year, we told students no more cell phones. And we've been doing no more cell phones for 30 years now.
Okay, so how do the students feel when they know that they are going to be engaging in this trip and going away without their smartphones or cell phones?
So since we've been talking, Sally, I've been talking to my students. I have 75 8th grade students this year. And I've been asking them, I said, I want you to think back to October when we went. And I said, because we're talking about cell phones and everything. I want to know how you felt. I mean, we had talked about it when we got back, but I want to know what you remember. What made such an impact on you that you still remember it all these months later? And so one of the first things they told me is that it was more good than it was bad. Mm-hmm. Okay. I said, tell me about that. And they said, we had to figure out our own entertainment. And without fail, they said over and over again, I've been at school here for 10 years. And that week we were on the trip, I talked to people I had never talked to before. I made friends. And I thought that was very powerful because it's easy to sit in a classroom or in any place and just surround yourself with the people you know. And so these kids had to branch out. So I asked them, how was the plane trip? How were the bus trips? We travel a lot, so we're in those situations for many hours. And the kids said they were great, which surprised me. I said, okay, why great? We got to talk to each other. And Mrs. Drews, you kept playing music so we could sing. And my bus did sing and dance quite a bit, I have to tell you. They told me that staying in the hotel room was really fun because they went into the hotel room. They had to figure out what TV show to watch. They had to talk to each other and communicate to get their schedules set up. And they said it was really great. They said overall, they felt like their days were more productive and that they formed better bonds with their friends than they would have if they had their cell phones with them.
That's amazing.
Now, sometimes they speak in such mature ways. I'm really impressed. Now, so I said, there's always a flip side. So tell me what the bad things were. And they said, in every group I talked to, we couldn't talk to our parents every day. And I said, well, okay, think about this for a minute. I said, because could you really not talk to your parents every day, or could you just not contact them on a whim? And so they did, they took a minute and they said, okay, we just couldn't contact them at any given time because the chaperones have cell phones. And any student, anyone at all who comes to one of us and says, I'm feeling homesick, or it's my brother's birthday, or my mom would just really love this, we say, great, we have 10 minutes. Do you want to do it now, or do you want to wait till lunchtime to call? We never deny a kid a chance to call home. And we had this year probably 4 or 5 kids who talked to their parents every single day. We just control it a little bit in terms of when they call. And we also coach them through, okay, you don't want to sound sad and lonely. You want to make sure you have positive things to tell mom and dad. So we practice that with them a little bit. It's all about trying to gain some independence from parents, from home, and from their cell phones. And I think we accomplished that most years. The only other thing that they told me they missed about having their cell phones is that they couldn't take their own pictures. But we carry school cameras with us, and they rotate them among the kids. So the kids do have an opportunity to take pictures. It just wasn't, once again, at the drop of a hat. Pick up your phone.
Yeah.
And we do that on purpose. Because if you walk through any tourist area, you'll see so many people walking around viewing everything through their phone, through the camera. And we really try and make an effort for the kids to be in the present.
Yep.
So
I think just touching on that, next month, our focus is going to be how do we raise outdoor kids in a digital world? And one of the things that we're going to be sharing in the newsletter is actually the science behind what actually neurologically happens when you are physically looking at something beautiful or awe-inspiring compared to looking at it through a screen. There is a definite scientific difference, and we've got so yeah. And I love, when you're talking, I hear how intentional you are with, helping, and that's one of the things. So just to back up, often children find themselves in a certain habitual pattern of using devices. There hasn't maybe been some coaching or some training about how to use them and when it's appropriate. And, like you say, not just doing things on a whim, but, thinking about it and coaching. And so hearing how intentional you are at helping guide the children, I think must be very impactful and something that they continue to take away even after the trip. So my next question is, so we've talked a bit about the students. So one of the things that we hear a lot at Smart Families is kind of the resistance and the fear, maybe the fear for the parents about not having access to their children. So tell me, how did you walk through that, or how do you continue to walk through that year on year?
It's funny that you say that, because when I was talking to the students in the past few days about being on the trip, they agreed, 100% of the students agreed that it was much harder for their parents than it was for them to know that they weren't going to have cell phones. It's very easy to get the kids on board with no cell phones. All I say is, do you really want your mom and dad to be texting you all day while we're gone? And they're like, no, I want them to leave me alone, to let me initiate that contact. So, well, don't take your cell phone, right? And then let me know when you need to call. And so it's very easy for the kids to buy into that. The parents have much more trouble. And I remember when this was a real issue, and it was before COVID. The parents, we had talked about this, and they were very resistant to the idea. And so I said in this parent meeting, I said, to all of you who think you're just going to tuck that cell phone into your students' luggage, just in case they need it, I want to ask you what they're going to do if they need it. And one mom was very visibly like, oh, she caught me. Okay, that's me. And so I asked her, I said, what's going to happen if she needs to call you? Well, she said, what if she has a problem with her roommates or she doesn't feel good or something happens? And I said, all those things happen every year. I said, what is she going to do if she has a cell phone? And the mom said, she's going to call me. And I said, that's great. What are you going to tell her? And the mom said, I'm going to tell her to find you. And I said, so all we're really doing in times of trouble is canceling out that middleman. Your kids can come to me at any time. And they do for all kinds of stuff. The kids are much more open to that than the parents are. Now, having said that, recently, Sally, you and I had talked that what we're finding is parents tracking their children, right? And the kids told me that the parents track them all the time, that's one of the main reasons they use a cell phone, that if they were ever to turn that off, their parents would take away their phones. But we ran into issues, not difficult issues, but we ran into issues this year with AirTags. And we kept getting really strange notifications popping up on our phones. Most of us had Apple phones. And it occurred to me just out of the blue. And I turned around on the bus and I said, hey, kids, if you have an AirTag in your backpack or in your pocket, would you raise your hand? I'm like, I don't know, 14 or 15 hands go up. I'm like, oh, those are all the notifications I'm getting. Okay, thanks. Just put your hands down. So they follow us even, when we don't know that they're following us. That's okay.
Yeah, and I know a lot of what we share and message with our parents is that we understand the fear, like we do. We recognize that we have definitely evolved into a fear-based society. Absolutely. And it's just helping. That's the kind of culture we want to change. We want to restore this safety when they're at school with the teachers, when I love the fact that the children get to experience this kind of like digital detox whilst they're away. I'm sure it feels very liberating for them not to be, tied to their devices. And then can you share in terms of, I know we discussed what time of year do you typically do this field trip? And I know you said that it was an intentional time that you did it as well.
It is. We go early in the year. Last year, we were there the second or third week of October. This next year coming up, we're going to go the first week of October. And we do that intentionally because we want this to be a bonding trip. We want this to be the trip where all of us learn to lean on each other, support each other, grow as our own 8th grade community, so that as they work through these last few months together at school, they recognize the family bonds that we have. At our school, I teach in a private school right now, and probably 50 to 60% of my students have been here for 10 years. Next year is the first time they're going to leave this school. And so we're just trying to build in that really tight feeling of belonging somewhere before they scatter. The kids this year will go to probably 18 different high schools. And so when they leave here, they're going to be on their own, but we want them to know they have support in those friends, that they have that community bond, and that they can always call on those people, even when they find themselves in a different school without all of us there. As a matter of fact, it's funny that this comes up now, Sally, because just yesterday afternoon, a past student from a couple of years ago came by and needed help with something. And I said, of course, come in. And he said, Mrs. Drews, I just wasn't sure where else to go, but I knew you'd help. I was like, great. So we spent an hour or so together. And it's those kind of bonds that we're trying to grow and to build by going so early in the year.
Absolutely. And I think, here at Smart Families, our, main messaging is that we provide the education for parents to decide to delay their smartphone till after 8th grade. However, yes. I know that we serve kind of some unique demographics of parents. We have kind of younger students whose parents maybe haven't even thought about a smartphone. We have typically 3rd, 4th, 5th when parents are maybe starting to think about smartphones. And then we have middle school. And currently in today's climate, we are finding that those students may already have a smartphone. But what we're hoping, one of the reasons I wanted to really engage with you on this call is to share that these 8th graders, this little snapshot of a week where they're able to live without a smartphone, and the kind of fruit that you see from this, and the belonging and the connection and the intentionality, like I envisage, and I'm very confident that actually is something we're going to gift to children in middle school, whereas parents decide to delay smartphones and maybe seek an alternative. And so it's just so nice for parents to hear that these kinds of weeks, and I know you shared with me, you've dealt with all kinds of things on those weeks through to, like illness, families who, I think you said somebody had passed away, was it a grandparent? And you are able to problem solve and find a solution and support these children, and be present with them. And that sometimes we can default to step away from being with the people we're with, and we're somewhere else via a phone. So I just really loved hearing about this trip. And then from a personal perspective too, so my 8th grader, he went on a field trip this year too, with no smartphone or any devices. Like, it was totally device free. And so I didn't have any access to him. And he was the same. He was told, if you need to speak to your parents, you can call whenever you want to go. Well, the kid never called me once. And people in my office, that was like every day. And when he came home, he was like, I was just having such a great time with my friends. And I was like, perfect. I am glad that you were present with those people and formed those strong bonds, because they're the things that are going to set him up to continue and carry on through his life. Just before, I'm just conscious of time, we've got a little bit of 5 more minutes, and then we can see if anybody has any questions or anything. You teach English language arts, and I touched a little bit on focus and attention. So do you have any observations? Oh, I saw I saw that instinctive reaction. How are you finding students are performing now, or what is their attention like, specifically when you are doing this prolonged, directed attention, and they have to, study for a book? What does it look like in your classroom today?
So the problem with attention, well, there are many problems with attention, but in general, I can tell you that students can't focus on something nearly as long as they could, say, 20 years ago, right? So regularly when we're doing independent reading, my class is up this year to about 18 minutes before there will be a behavior I have to correct. 20 years ago, 18 minutes was the least amount of time that the kids paid attention. That's where we started the school year, is okay, let's see how long we can go. And it would be about 18. Now here at the end of the school year, they've worked up to about 18 minutes. And so there's a huge difference there in how long you can attend to something. I find the same thing in writing, because we write every day. And by the time we hit about 15 minutes or so, they're doing that turning and oh, I'm so stiff and I can't sit here any longer and I need to talk to somebody. And it's just so very different. There's a need for a lot of positive affirmation. Yes, you're doing the right thing. Yes, this is a great idea. Yes, keep on going. Because, they're not getting, I think, that dopamine hit that they get online. So they need that verbal affirmation that things are good, keep going. So I'm definitely seeing a huge difference in that. And that worries me a little bit, because I know that as they go into high school and into college, if we want to develop deep thinkers, thinking deeply takes time. And part of that is they have to be able to focus. So that is a problem that we're seeing.
And I think, absolutely, like I said at the beginning of the call, our program, is very uniquely placed that we interact with teachers, with counselors, with students, with parents, and across the board. Like I said at the beginning, these are not isolated. If your child is struggling with homework at home and, maintaining focus and attention to get their homework, well, it's fairly safe to say now that you can almost be assured that the teacher's probably experiencing the same, issue at school, at being able to help coach that child to keep that attention and keep, manage their distractions. And again, the research that's coming out, especially the content that children access via the smartphones, is priming their brains to, be sure kind of give them that short attention span window. And it's just very, and I was seeing it, so I taught the younger grades and I would see it there. And so, you know, it's been an interesting conversation between Sheila and I, because she's kind of at the very end of kind of a child's schooling through middle school, of what that also can still look like. So it's definitely very interesting. Do they, would you say, do the children have an awareness that they have this kind of struggle and challenge too? Or do you think it's just become so the norm of how people are at schools that, you know, is it just the adults that are noticing it? What do the children say?
They feel like it's very normal, that their movement from one topic to the next and their need to stretch and move and get positive feedback. They think that's all very normal because they don't know anything else. And I think that, well, as I said, the deep thinking it becomes a problem. So I've taken to having the students start a particular piece of writing and then taking it from them and keeping it for a little while and giving it back a few days later and saying, let's see what you were thinking a few days ago and let's work on that now. And then I take it away and I give it back a few days later and, well, let's look at this now. You know, I think one of the problems with finding things online is that very often they find things online that seem to answer a problem, but don't really answer the problem. They get information that is far above what they can do right now. English is a skills-based class, right? And so I'm building skills little bit by little bit, and they're jumping way up to the top of something because they want an answer, but they've missed the skill building part of it down here below. So online doesn't serve them very well in that sense. And they don't see that always, and neither do their parents. And I think that's hard too.
Definitely some definite interesting trends and shifts going on with education. And I think, you know, I'm so grateful that you're able to kind of share with people here today, and this will be recorded, and the recording will be made available for people to share if they also want to hear. I think sometimes it's just reassuring as a parent to know, okay, it's not just me at home having all of these battles and trying to do these things. And that's why here at Smart Families, we just want to unite people together and say, we are wanting to change the culture of kind of the school and what it's like for an adolescent to grow up now. The way we do that is by all working together. We all share, you know, right. We're all very vulnerable and say, gosh, you know, sometimes this is hard and I don't know what to do. And so again, our main messaging is delaying these smartphones, because we know a smartphone is kind of a gateway. What that does is it allows the children to access a lot of this content that we know is changing and manipulating the way that the brains are developing. So this has been such a lovely conversation. I know one of the things that I will be doing in the future is going in to schools to come and speak more with teachers like Sheila, also speaking to students, because and I love that you shared what the students' thoughts and views were too, because they're definitely not a voiceless component to this. You know, they also have their own thoughts and ideas, and it's very empowering for the students to learn as well about what it is that their brains are doing when they're using these kinds of, you know, this kind of content. So I am going to, we've got a few minutes. I can open up if anybody has any comments and anybody has any questions for either Sheila or myself. We do have a few minutes left. We are going to be running this webinar again tonight at 7 p.m. So if you have heard this today and you're like, oh, I want to share it out with anybody, then please feel free to share that link, and Sheila will be joining us again. But thank you so much, Sheila. I know you've got to go back to your class.
Thank you, Sheila. Very, very insightful. This is Hillary here. That was wonderful. Thank you for your time. It was very helpful to hear what's happening in the classrooms.
Thank you.
I've also shared a link in the comments area for anybody who's interested. There's a way to subscribe directly to our newsletters and to hear about upcoming talks, in addition to the link that Sally shared for the TED Talk, the one portion. I included the full link there.
And then next month, we are going to be focusing on, like I said, raising outdoor kids in a digital world, looking at kind of neurological development of children, as well as being kind of distracted and having their attention hijacked because of the content that they're using on smartphones. There's also a deficit because children aren't engaging and going outside as much. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about vestibular systems, what it is that children are growing and doing and achieving by being outside more and interacting with the world around them, and how that can help kind of offset some of these big changes that we are noticing in things like their attention and how distracted they are. Things like the science of awe and wonder. What is that? You know, why that actually helps with children developing these executive functioning skills. So that's going to be next month. And that's something that I am extremely interested in as a way of, you know, how do we kind of help the deficit and help our children be successful at school, you know, at home, but also, you know, in the big wide world when they eventually that time comes. So I want to say thank you again for everybody for being here. I know use the chat if there's anything you want to capture before we close this down, but thank you so much and have a wonderful Tuesday, everybody.